Of course. Here's Section 1 based on your instructions. A clear, tightly focused narrative introducing the world, the characters, and the first major connection, capped around 1,500 words, without headings or any distracting elements. The twin suns of Verdalia hung low, their amber light painting the endless jungles and crumbling ruins in molten gold. Ancient statues leaned against one another, worn smooth by centuries of rain and rebellion, their faces forgotten, their meaning lost. Among the tangled vines and shattered stone, life thrived defiantly. Colossal birds streaked across the skies, and serpentine creatures slithered through the roots, whispering through the underbrush. Cale adjusted the battered strap of his survival pack and pressed forward, boots crunching over moss-laden rubble. Every breath filled his lungs with the heavy perfume of alien flora. He had long since lost track of how many days had passed since the crash, but the drive to move, to find something, anything, that resembled civilization, pushed him onward. The jungle whispered in languages he would never understand. Verdalia was as beautiful as it was hostile, and Cale had no illusions about how easily it might claim his life. The first sound was a whimper, thin and cracked, almost swallowed by the hum of the jungle. Cale paused, hand instinctively dropping to the worn grip of his knife. He waited, listening. Another whimper, followed by a guttural, broken yowl, not of any creature he had yet encountered. His instinct screamed to move on, to stay safe, but something about that desperate, wounded sound gnawed at him. He followed it, carefully picking his way over twisted roots and broken stones. The source became clear, a clearing ringed by crumbled pillars, vines choking their surfaces, where an injured creature lay sprawled. Cale froze, heart hammering. It was a youngling, a creature both terrifying and pitiful. Massive paws too large for its frame twitched weakly. Its fur was a brilliant cascade of orange and black, marred by fresh wounds. Two striking, intelligent eyes, blue as Verdalia's twin moons, locked onto his. It was a tiger, yet not. Its frame was heavier, its shoulders armored with bone ridges, and something about the way it watched him spoke of a sentience far beyond any beast. Cale sheathed his knife slowly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. The young creature whimpered again, tried to lift its head before collapsing in exhaustion. Around the clearing, he saw evidence of what had transpired. Spears embedded in the ground, dark stains of blood. Someone had tried to kill it. He approached cautiously, the creature's breathing shallow, its flank rising and falling in sharp, painful jerks. Cale knelt beside it, wincing at the deep gashes that crossed its side. "Easy, easy," he murmured, his voice low and soothing. The creature flinched but did not flee. It took hours to tend to the wounds with the limited supplies he had, working under the dimming light. All the while, the creature watched him, unblinking. When he finally finished, wrapping a crude bandage around the worst of the injuries, he sat back, exhausted. "You're a stubborn one," Cale said, half smiling. The creature's tail thumped once against the ground in response. A heavy sigh escaped him. He had enough trouble surviving on his own, and now he had a responsibility he hadn't asked for. Yet, abandoning it was unthinkable. Whatever this creature was, it was now his. The days that followed carved their bond from hardship and small victories. Cale named the creature Vara after an old Earth word meaning protector, a half-forgotten term from a language his mother had spoken. Vara learned quickly, far faster than any earthly beast. For Cale came to think of Vara as female, followed him to the ruins, her strength growing with each passing day. She hunted small prey despite her healing wounds, shared her kills with him without hesitation, and slept curled around him at night, her body a warm shield against Verdalia's chilling nights. Cale noticed other changes, too. Vara's once blue eyes deepened, almost glowing under moonlight. Her muscles swelled with strength unnatural for her young age. Occasionally, when threatened by one of Verdalia's many dangers, she moved with a frightening speed and precision that Cale barely comprehended, reacting to threats before he even sensed them. Still, danger brewed closer than the wilds. They saw signs, scorch marks on trees, heavy tracks in the mud, shattered totems marking tribal boundaries. Verdalians. Cale had only glimpsed them from a distance. Green-skinned beings, elegant and fierce, their bodies adorned with gold and bone, their faces proud and suspicious. They rode armored beasts and carried weapons that hummed with strange energies. He kept his distance, knowing how aliens treated outsiders, especially one seen with something as powerful as Vara at their side. It was Vara who noticed him first one evening, as the jungle dipped into darkness. She growled low in her throat, hackles raised. Kale caught the faint shimmer of figures moving through the trees, stalking them. No time to flee. They came in force. 10 Verdalians, faces painted in war colors, spears and blasters gleaming. At their head stood a woman unlike the rest. Tall, with skin the shade of deep emerald and hair black as Verdalia's richest soil, she moved with a grace that spoke of authority. A thin circlet of gold sat upon her brow, and her gaze, sharp as a blade, never left Kale or Vara. The woman stepped forward, raising a hand. Her voice, when she spoke, was commanding and melodic, though Kale understood not the words. He raised his hands, a universal sign of peace, but Vara snarled beside him, unwilling to show submission. The woman's gaze flicked to Vara, and something shifted in her posture. Not fear, but recognition, perhaps even awe. One of her warriors barked something in their tongue, but she silenced him with a look. Kale could read the room even without understanding the language. They didn't come to parley. They came to take. Perhaps Vara was some sacred creature to them, or a weapon they feared falling into wrong hands. Either way, Kale knew surrender would mean death. For both of them, he tightened his grip on Vara's thick fur. "Not gonna happen," he muttered. Tension thrummed through the air. The warriors advanced slowly, spreading out, surrounding them. Vara crouched low, muscles tense like coiled steel. Kale braced himself, heart pounding. Before the standoff could explode into bloodshed, the woman made a swift, cutting motion with her hand. Her warriors froze. She stepped even closer, until only a few paces separated them. Slowly, deliberately, she knelt and pressed her palm to the earth in front of her, a gesture Kale did not fully understand, but instinctively recognized. A sign of respect. A plea. He looked into her eyes and saw no malice, only fierce curiosity and something deeper, a recognition of the bond between him and Vara, something that transcended language and species. The moment stretched taut between them, a thin thread spun of trust and desperation. Vara, sensing Kale's uncertainty, rumbled lowly but did not attack. She stood tall at his side, her head high, her muscles rippling with power barely held in check. In that moment, Kale realized that Vara was no longer a helpless pup. She was becoming something more, something that would not be owned or commanded by fear. She chose him, and he her, and together they would face whatever storm was. Of course, continuing smoothly from Section 1, here is Section 2, crafted tightly, staying under 1,500 words, and keeping the focus sharp on advancing the story. The seasons on Verdalia shifted in ways Kale had yet to fully grasp. Days stretched longer, nights colder, the rains heavier and more urgent. Time became measured not by calendars, but by the steady transformation of Vara beside him. What once had been a wounded, oversized cub was now a towering beast of majesty and terror. Her frame had broadened with thick layers of muscle, her fangs grown to the length of Kale's forearm. The once soft coat now gleamed like polished obsidian striped with fire, and the twin moons reflected in her intelligent, watchful eyes. She moved with a predatory grace that belied her enormous size, her every motion controlled, deliberate. Yet despite her raw power, Vara remained fiercely gentle with Kale. She would lower her massive head to nuzzle his hand, or curl around him protectively when he slept. In her, Kale saw the strange miracle he had nurtured. Not just strength, but loyalty born of shared hardship and trust, unshakable and absolute. Their bond had grown more essential with each passing day, especially as the surrounding world grew more hostile. Patrols of Verdalian warriors grew frequent, their presence less cautious, more emboldened. It wasn't just survival now. Kale and Vara were targets, symbols of something greater the Verdalian tribes feared or desired. Word traveled in whispers Kale did not hear, but could feel. He saw it in the sharpened eyes of passing scouts, in the strange totems abandoned near their paths, in the subtle traps left in the undergrowth. They were being hunted. One evening, as dusk draped the jungle in velvet shadows, Kale and Vara found themselves cornered. It began with a single war horn, a low, mournful note that seemed to bleed from the trees themselves. Vara's ears flicked sharply, and she bristled, hackles rising. Kale tensed, drawing his knife out of instinct more than practicality. It was little more than a sliver of defense against what came next. Dozens of figures emerged from the gloom, fanning out around them with military precision. Spears tipped with humming energy, nets woven with electrified vines. Blasters held at ready. This was no scouting party. This was an execution. At their center stood the green-skinned woman Kale recognized immediately, the one who had spared him once. Her eyes were as fierce as he remembered, but now steeled with grim purpose. A deep crimson cloak billowed from her shoulders, a mark of her elevated status. The crown she wore gleamed even in the dying light. Kale's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew he could not fight his way out. Not this time. Vara let out a low, menacing growl that reverberated through the clearing, causing even the seasoned warriors to falter. The woman raised her hand sharply, halting their advance. Silence reigned, tense and suffocating. She stepped forward, alone, her spear grounded at her side as a symbol of peace or perhaps defiance. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of command, though Kale could only catch fragments of meaning. One word stood out, spoken with reverence and warning alike. Protect her. She gestured to Vara, then to the warriors behind her, then made a slicing motion across her own chest, a clear message: surrender or be cut down. Kale clenched his fists, rage and helplessness warring within him. He opened his mouth to respond, to shout defiance in words they would not understand, but Vara moved first. With a roar that shook leaves from the trees, she leapt forward, not at the woman, but high into the air, landing with such force that the earth trembled. The shock wave threw several of the warriors back, scattering them like dry leaves before a storm. Chaos erupted. Warriors shouted, weapons fired, nets flew through the air. Kale ducked instinctively as a spear hissed past his ear. Vara moved like liquid fury, swatting weapons aside with deadly precision, dodging energy blasts with impossible speed. She fought not to kill but to protect, forcing the warriors back step by step. Kale, hard in his throat, could do little more than stay close, shielded by Vara's massive form. The woman watched, motionless, eyes burning with a strange mixture of awe and calculation. She raised her hand again, and, reluctantly, the warriors retreated, forming a wary circle at a safer distance. Kale breathed heavily, sweat slicking his skin. He met the woman's gaze and for the first time saw something shift there, an acknowledgement that brute force would not claim the creature at his side. The standoff ended as suddenly as it had begun. The woman spoke sharply, and the warriors withdrew into the jungle shadows, their departure as swift as their arrival. Yet Kale knew this was no victory. It was only a delay. Later that night, as they sheltered beneath the overhanging ruins of an ancient temple, Kale tended to a shallow cut along Vara's flank. She endured it stoically, her great eyes half closed, rumbling softly under his touch. "They won't stop," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "They're afraid of you. Of us." Vara's only response was to lean her massive head against him, an immense, comforting weight. He closed his eyes, feeling the steady pulse of her life, her trust. Trust he could not afford to betray. The following days were marked by a strange stillness. No more direct attacks came, but Kale felt the noose tightening. Scouts watched from the treetops. Messages were etched into trees in languages he could not read, but whose intent was clear. You are trespassers. You are warned. It was not long before Kale learned the true nature of the threat. From the crest of a rocky ridge, he and Var looked down upon a gathering like nothing they had yet seen. Hundreds of Verdalians assembled before a grand temple carved from the very bones of the earth. Banners fluttered, fires burned, and at the center, on a raised dais, stood the green-skinned woman. But she was not alone. Beside her stood figures draped in crimson and gold, bearing symbols Kale instinctively understood to mean power, royalty, and judgment. This was no war party. It was a council, a trial, and they were the accused. Kale watched as effigies were raised, crude representations of a man and a monstrous beast, set ablaze to the roaring approval of the crowd. His stomach twisted. They had become myth before they had even understood the rules of the world they stumbled into. Vara huffed, low and anxious beside him. She understood, too. A decision had been made. They could not run forever. They could not hide. If survival meant anything now, it meant confronting the powers that sought to destroy them. Kale would have to find a way to speak in a language the Verdalians could not ignore, not of words, but of deeds, of strength, of honor, of the bond that no outsider could sever. He rested his hand against Vara's powerful shoulder, feeling her heartbeat thrumming through his palm. "We're not alone," he said softly. "Not anymore." In the distance, the twin moons rose together, casting silver fire across the temple stones, as if the world itself bore witness to what was coming. Kale knew their real fight had only just begun. "Would you like me to move straight into Section 3 next, keeping the flow tight and intense? I can keep the narrative building right toward the big confrontation with the princess and the larger threat. Here's Section 3, continuing seamlessly from the tone and tension of Section 2, focused, vivid, and under 1,500 words. The temple grounds lay eerily silent beneath the twin moons. Smoke curled from the burnt effigies, winding its way into the sky like whispered threats. Kale moved cautiously, Vara at his side, each footstep placed with deliberate care. The council had dispersed, but their judgment lingered heavy in the air, a suffocating presence that promised retribution. They needed allies. Kale knew it instinctively. Without understanding the deeper laws of this world, without knowing its loyalties, he and Vara stood little chance against the collective will of an entire civilization. Their answer came sooner than Kale expected. As they made their way through the dense underbrush, a figure broke in the shadows, alone, hands raised, unarmed. Vara bristled, a deep rumble vibrating through her chest, but Kale lifted a hand to stay her. The figure stepped closer, revealing a slender Verdalian youth, barely more than a boy, draped in rough traveler's cloth instead of warrior's armor. He spoke hurriedly in a dialect Kale struggled to understand, but the urgency needed no translation. The boy pressed a small medallion into Kale's hand, an emblem depicting the same green-skinned woman they had seen at the council. His other hand made a series of frantic gestures. Follow, hurry. Trust was a dangerous currency, but Kale weighed his options quickly. Staying meant certain death. Moving meant only probable death. With a nod, he urged Vara forward, and the boy led them through hidden paths only a native could know, twisting corridors of rock and vine, dry riverbeds, crumbling stone bridges long reclaimed by the jungle. Hours passed, or perhaps only moments. Time lost meaning in their desperate flight. At last, they arrived at a secluded cavern illuminated by the soft glow of bioluminescent flora. The boy whistled sharply, a high, trembling note. From the shadows emerged more Verdalians, these ones clad not in crimson and gold, but in muted browns and greens, the colors of the wild itself. Their faces were painted with intricate patterns, not for war, but for ceremony, for mourning. The eldest among them stepped forward. His skin bore the same verdant hue, but his hair was a silver cascade down his back. His eyes, piercing and clear, assessed Kale and Vara with a depth that unsettled him. When he spoke, his voice was like the shifting of old stone, slow, measured, inevitable. Through halting, broken exchanges, Kale pieced together their offer. They were the Verdalian free tribes, those who had refused the rule of the High Council and their new queen. To them, Kale and Vara were not abominations, but omens, signs of long-prophesied upheaval. The elder spoke of sovereign, an ancient law buried beneath centuries of tradition, the right of protection and fealty owed the protector and the chosen. Kale did not fully understand the nuances, but the gist was clear. If he and Vara could survive the trial of sovereignty, they could not merely earn survival. They could command allegiance. It was a gamble laced with blood. Kale sat by the cavern's fire that night, weighing the enormity of the choice. Vara rested her massive head against his knee, eyes closed but senses keen. He ran his fingers through the rough fur between her ears, seeking comfort, or perhaps the courage he feared was failing him. "I can't ask you to fight their war," he whispered. Vara's tail thumped once against the stone floor, a wordless rebuttal. She had already chosen. By dawn, preparations began. The trial was brutal in its simplicity. Before the full assembly of the council and free tribes alike, Kale and Vara would enter the Crucible, a sacred arena carved into the cliffs above the valley. There, they would face the Guardians, beasts bred and bound by ancient rights to defend Verdalian sovereignty. Victory would not be enough. They had to dominate, to inspire such awe that no Verdalian, loyalist or free, would dare deny their claim. The day of the trial, the Crucible roared with gathered voices, a cacophony of hope, anger, and fear. Kale stood at the threshold, the heavy scent of incense and blood filling his lungs. Across the field, the High Queen, Soraya, he now knew her name, watched from her throne of living wood and stone, her expression unreadable. The first guardian emerged, a hulking beast stitched together from nightmare and ritual. 6 legs, spiked hide, twin maws dripping venom. It charged with a speed that belied its bulk. Kale barely had time to react before Vara sprang into motion. Their battle was a symphony of violence and precision. Vara's strength was unmatched, but it was their bond that gave him the edge. Each move was anticipated, each strike calculated. When the Guardian lunged, Kale distracted. When it cornered him, Vara crushed it with a roar that shattered the very air. Blood soaked the sands before the crowd could even fully comprehend what had happened. But the trial was not yet over. 2 more Guardians were unleashed simultaneously, a cruel mockery of the right's ancient honor. Kale saw the betrayal in Soraya's smile, cold and razor-sharp. Vara stood her ground, unyielding. Kale moved instinctively, seizing a broken spear from sands. He knew he was no match for such monsters alone, but he didn't need to defeat them. He needed only to be the spark for Vara's fury. And fury answered. The battle stretched into endless moments, every breath a prayer, every heartbeat a hammer strike. When the final beast fell, the arena fell into a stunned silence. Kale staggered to Vara's side, bloody, bruised, but alive. Soraya rose from her throne, fury flashing across her regal features. She opened her mouth, ready to declare some twisted verdict, but the free tribes moved first. Their elders stepped forward, raising the medallion of sovereignty high for all to see. The crowd responded, not with words, but with a deep, resonant thrum, a pounding of fists against chests, a primal acknowledgement of an ancient pact fulfilled. Soraya's authority shattered under the weight of that sound. Kale met her gaze across the sands, seeing the truth burn there. She could no longer command through fear alone. The tide had turned. That night, beneath the canopy of stars, Kale sat with Var by the fire once more. The free tribes gathered around them in a protective ring. Songs were sung in languages Kale did not know, but their meaning was unmistakable. Honor, loyalty, rebirth. Vara dozed, her sides rising and falling with steady breaths, her fur still streaked with the blood of their enemies. Kale watched the flames dance, knowing this victory was only the beginning. Soraya would not accept defeat quietly. Her power had been challenged before the eyes of her people. She would move against them, sooner or later, with the full force of Verdalia's fury. Kale rested his hand on Vara's flank, feeling the heat of her life radiating beneath his palm. Together, they had changed the course of this world, and together they would defend it. The jungle whispered in the night, secrets rustling through ancient leaves. Kale closed his eyes and listened. The real war was coming. Would you like me to continue and start Section 4 now? It'll push even further into the final confrontation and wrap the arc beautifully. Of course. Here's Section 4, concluding this part of the story with a strong, clear arc, staying under 1,500 words and maintaining the tight, vivid style. Dawn crept over Verdalia in muted hues of gold and blue, the sky veiled by thin mist that clung to the treetops like ancient spirits. Kale stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the horizon. Beside him, Vara shifted, restless, sensing the shift in the air. Today was not a day for peace. The free tribes had moved quickly in the days following their victory. They fortified the surrounding valleys, forged alliances with neighboring clans who had long simmered under Soraya's rule. Yet for all their newfound strength, Kale knew they were not ready. The queen would strike soon, before descent solidified into revolution. And strike she did. The first sign came as a low rumble beneath the earth, subtle, almost imagined. Then the jungle erupted into chaos. Fires bloomed along the ridgelines, plumes of black smoke unfurling into the dawn sky. From the trees descended Soraya's elite guard, draped in crimson and bone, moving with ruthless efficiency. Kale barely had time to call a warning before the first arrows fell. Warriors scattered to defensive positions. The free tribes rallied around him in Vara, the undeniable heart of their resistance. Blood would be the price of their freedom. Vara roared, the sound tearing the battlefield, and the enemy faltered, if only for a heartbeat. It was enough. Kale led the charge, the tribes flowing behind him like a living tide. The battle was brutal and close. Spears shattered against Vara's armor hide. Warriors felt her teeth and claws. Kale fought with desperate precision, his movements honed by necessity rather than training. Every action served a single purpose: protect Vara, protect the tribes. Through the smoke, Kale caught sight of Soraya herself, standing upon a palanquin borne by enslaved beasts, her staff raised high. Power crackled around her, a storm barely contained. She was no mere figurehead. She was Verdalia's wrath made flesh. Kale knew what he had to do, fighting his way through the melee. He cut a bloody path toward her, Vara clearing the way with terrifying ferocity. The queen saw him coming. She dismounted gracefully, her crimson robe swirling as she summoned her personal guard to encircle her. Kale and Vara broke through like a thunderclap. Steel met steel, flesh met flesh. The world narrowed to the clash of wills, the struggle between an ancient regime and the wild, stubborn defiance of those it sought to crush. Soraya met Kale's first strike with a sneer, her staff whirling to deflect his blade. She was fast, unnaturally fast. Every movement radiated power honed over decades of rule. Kale fought defensively, buying time, trusting Vara to protect his flanks. But Soraya was not fighting alone. From the ranks of her warriors, another figure stepped forward. A second beast, larger than the first, bound by cruel chains of light. A corrupted creature, twisted by Verdalian magic to serve without will. Kale's heart sank as the creature lunged at Vara. The two titans collided with sound like mountains breaking. Vara fought with the fury of the wild, but her opponent was relentless, its pain making it stronger, its chains feeding its rage. Kale gritted his teeth, pushing harder against Soraya. He had to end this. Fast. Their duel raged across the burning field, neither yielding. Kale realized he could not match her in brute strength, but he had something she did not, something she could never command: trust. Risking everything, he broke away, leaving his back exposed. Soraya, confident in her imminent victory, raised her staff for the killing blow. Vara saw it. With a bellow of rage, she slammed her foe into the earth and leapt across the battlefield, her massive body colliding with Soraya just as the staff descended. The impact sent the queen sprawling, her weapon skittering across the stones. Kale moved, faster than thought, and pressed the tip of his blade to her throat. The battlefield fell silent. Smoke curled around them. The wounded groaned in the distance. Warriors from both sides froze, watching, waiting. The moment hung, fragile and absolute. Soraya stared up at Kale, her eyes blazing with hatred, with fear. "You have no right," she spat, voice trembling. Kale said nothing. He didn't need to. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his blade. To kill her now would make her a martyr, fuel the cycle of violence. He would not give her that. Instead, he turned to the assembled warriors, lifting the medallion of sovereignty high. His voice, hoarse but unyielding, rang out across the broken field. "The old ways are finished," he declared. "Verdalia belongs to its people, not to those who would chain it." For a long, breathless moment, there was no response. Then, one by one, warriors knelt. First the free tribes, then, hesitantly, members of Soraya's own army. The symbol Kale held, the living proof beside him in Vara, the undeniable strength they had shown. It was enough. It had to be. Soraya's crown, torn from her brow, rolled forgotten in the dust. Victory did not feel like triumph. It felt like exhaustion, like the unbearable weight of responsibility settling onto Kale's shoulders. Later, as the fires were extinguished and the dead laid to rest, Kale stood at the edge of the valley, watching the stars reassert themselves in the night sky. Vara sat beside him, her massive frame battered but proud. The free tribes gathered behind him, waiting for guidance, for leadership. Kale turned slowly, meeting their expectant gazes. He had not asked for this. He had not sought to become their symbol, their hope, but he could not turn away. He thought of the helpless pup he had found so long ago, weak and dying, and how nurturing that fragile life had led to this, an unbreakable bond that no council, no queen, no ancient law could deny. Vara nudged him gently, her enormous head brushing aside. He smiled, weary but resolute. Together, they would build something better, not an empire, a home. The jungle whispered again, a softer song this time, full of promise. Kale listened, and for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, he heard the future calling. Would you also like a short optional epilogue afterward to give a final, satisfying emotional beat if you're planning to wrap this into a full story? If yes, I could do it quickly too.